Welcome to the third video lecture for our unit on solutions. In this video lecture, we are going to cover how to actually make solutions in the lab from either a solid solute or from a liquid. So a couple of pieces of lab equipment that we would use to do this. First is a volumetric flask, which is a very precise piece of glassware that comes in various sizes that are very, very specific. So typically they'll come in sizes like 100 milliliters, 250 milliliters, 500 milliliters, 1,000 milliliters. They're very specific increments. You can't just buy one for whatever, 37 milliliters. And how you use this is if you were to fill it up to the marking on the neck, that is going to be exactly 250 milliliters or whatever the flask is made to measure out. It is super specific, very precise. That's why these are relatively expensive pieces of glassware, but we use them because it makes life easy for making solutions. Some of them come with a cap to put on them. Some of them don't. If we don't have one of these glass toppers, we just use a rubber stopper. Same thing. We also get to use a new pipette, which you will get to work with in class at some point. It's called a glass pipette, which is also super, super precise and accurate. So these come in specific increments as well in specific volumes. So this one that I'm showing on the screen would be a 25 milliliter glass pipette. If you fill it up to, again, there's a marking on the neck. If you fill it up exactly to that marking, it would be exactly 25 milliliters. Now keep in mind, when I say fill it up to the marking, that there will be a meniscus, and we always want the bottom of the meniscus at that marking. To use these, we would use a bulb, which looks like this. It goes on the top up here of the glass pipette, and it basically is just used to create suction so that we can pull solution up into the glass pipette, and then if we take it off, the solution will just fall right out. These are not the greatest to use. They're tedious. It takes some practice to use the glass pipette with the bulb, but it's a good skill. Once you get it, you kind of get it. But it takes practice, which we'll have to do in class. So using those pieces of equipment, let's talk about how to make solutions from a solid solute, and then we'll go to a liquid one. So the first thing we would need to do, we don't have to use a glass pipette for this because we're not measuring any solutions in that small of an increment. So we're going to use a weigh boat, and we're going to measure out the amount of solute needed to make our solution, which might require us to do some math if we're not directly told how much is needed. And you're going to add that to the bottom of a volumetric flask based on the volume of solution you're asked to make. So if I ask you to make a 100 milliliter solution of whatever, 0.2 molar sodium nitrate, you would add the sodium nitrate solid into the bottom of a 100 milliliter flask. You wouldn't use a 250 milliliter flask to make 100 milliliters of solution. The second thing is we're going to add distilled water using a wash bottle until the flask is about half full. And it's important that we fill it half full first before filling it all the way to the neck, because we need to get this solid to dissolve. And if we fill it up first to the neck, there's going to be no movement in my solution to dissolve anything. You could swirl and swirl all you want. but there's going to be no movement down here because there's no airspace. So by filling this only halfway, when you swirl it, you should be able to get some collisions between the solid and the water to dissolve the solute. So then the third step would be to swirl and dissolve the solid. Once the solid is fully dissolved, then you can add more distilled water so that the bottom of the meniscus comes to that marking on the neck. Once you've reached that point, we need to mix because sometimes the water doesn't mix with the dissolved solute that you had in the flask initially. So we would cap the volumetric flask and invert it a couple of times just to make sure everything is uniformly distributed. And that would be your solution. Keeping in mind, if you do go past the marking on the neck, you add too much water the second time, you would have to start over because there's no way for you to get that water back and ensure that you did not also grab solute out as well. So now let's talk about how to make a solution from a liquid solute, like a really concentrated stock solution. So again, we're going to pick a volumetric flask that matches the volume of solution we're asked to make. We're going to start by adding distilled water to the flask till it's about, doesn't really matter, about a quarter of the way full, maybe a third, it doesn't really matter. But by putting the water in first, when you add a concentrated solute to that, if something were to splash up at you, heaven forbid, it would be water instead of the concentrated solute that you're trying to add. So like if this were really concentrated hydrochloric acid, I think you would rather have water splashing up at your face than the acid. So you put a little bit of water in, you add your solute, your liquid solute, by using a glass pipette to measure that out, and you would add it into the flask. You would have to use the dilution equation to figure out how much of this liquid solute you would need, but you'd be able to measure it out and add it. And we use glass pipettes because it's super accurate and super precise, so that we're making the best solution possible. Once you've added your liquid solute, then you are going to add some water and swirl just to make sure everything's mixing properly. And then you fill it up to the marking on the neck, making sure the bottom of the meniscus is at the neck or the marking. And then you cap and invert a couple times just to make sure everything gets uniformly distributed. And then you would be done with your solution. So that's it. That's how you make a solution from either a solid solute or from a liquid solute.